Hey pen people, this is the Omas Ogiva in the new limited edition Espresso Martini colorway. It's absolutely gorgeous, but it costs almost $500. And this is the Omas Paragon in the wild finish, and it costs more than $1,000. Why on earth would someone pay that kind of money for a fountain pen, right? Especially when there are so many good options out there for like a tenth of the price. That's what I want to try to uncover in this video. And I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Is buying expensive fountain pens like this worth it to you? Or are you content to stick with more budget-friendly options? A big thanks to Omas for sending me these pens. The Ogiva, they're letting me add to my collection, but the Paragon, sadly, I'll be returning to them after I make another video or two about it. The entry-level fountain pens I'm going to compare to these Omas pens is the TWSBI Eco, which costs $30 to $40-ish, depending on the retailer. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you might know that I haven't always been a big fan of the TWSBI Eco. Both of these pens cracked on me, but I came down off my high horse and I got them fixed. And this time around, I'm not going to swap the nibs and tinker as much, so I'm hoping that I won't have any cracking issues moving forward. And it's been nice to have them back in rotation. They're cool pens. Anyway, there are two reasons why I'm going to compare these Omas pens to the TWSBI Eco. First, the TWSBI Eco is a very recognizable, popular entry-level fountain pen. The other reason is that the TWSBI Eco is a piston-filled fountain pen, and so are these Omas pens. These are piston fillers. So I feel like these will give us a really good point-by-point comparison from the lower end of fountain pens to the higher end. To help me get this video out promptly, I'm going to flip the camera around and do a classic hand style video. All right, so here's the Ogiva, the Paragon, and our two TWSBI Ecos. Let's start with the overall aesthetic and construction of these pens, because those are often areas where you immediately see the apparent differences between high and low end pens. And you can see there is a pretty stark difference between these two brands. This is a little bit more utilitarian and simple. These are much more ornate, and there's a lot more to look at. First, we're going to look at the Ogiva and the Eco. These pens are both made out of acrylic, but as you can see, acrylics can vary widely in their appearance. And if I had to guess, I would say that the acrylic of the Ogiva is more costly to make than the acrylic of the Eco. And Omas's pens are handmade, and you can see the incredible attention to detail on this pen. The seams and surfaces are all super clean. Everything fits really well where it needs to go. Meanwhile, on the TWSBI Eco, you can see an injection mold line there. It's still a nice pen. It's still well made. It's just, you can tell it just has a more factory type feel as opposed to a more handmade kind of feel. So yeah, the Omas pen is far more elaborate and just has a lot more going on, and there's a lot more attention to detail, and that contributes to the cost. The Omas Paladin is made of celluloid, which is a material you see a lot in vintage pens, I believe. I don't really know the pros and cons between acrylic and celluloid, but I can tell you that celluloid is not something you're really ever going to see on entry-level pens. The only time I've seen it, at least, is on fancier pens like this. So I'm guessing that the material there is part of why this pen is so expensive. The Omas pens are also significantly heavier than the TWSBI Eco. Now, some people make the mistake of equating weight with quality. That's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of featherweight pens that can be very high quality, and there are plenty of bad, heavy pens out there. These Omas pens, though, don't feel too heavy. They just feel substantial, especially the Paladin. Hey, me from the future here. I am sorry, I keep saying the name of this pen wrong. It is not the Omas Paladin. It is the Omas Paragon. Again, I've watched too many dorky superhero shows and I'm getting the words confused. I'm sorry. It's the Omas Paragon. It just feels so solid. The resin on both Omas pens just feels thicker and denser than the Eco, and I'm noticing a significant part of the weight is in the back, which makes me think Omas is using metal hardware for their piston filling system as opposed to the plastic hardware on the TWSBI Eco. These pens don't feel back-weighted though. Again, they just feel substantial. Another critical difference is how the nibs actually attach to the body of the pen. We'll talk more about how the nibs themselves are different here in a second. The Eco has a friction fit nib, which means that they just shove the nib and the feed directly up into the grip section, and it's tight enough to hold it there in place. And a lot of entry-level pens are like that, but I think that's in part why I ran into cracking issues with the TWSBI Eco. There's a lot of pressure from the nib and feed pushing outward against the grip section, and if there's some sort of weakness, like an injection mold line or a little micro crack or something, then that pressure, in my opinion, can become a liability. But with the Omas pens, you can see here that there's some extra material between the nib and the outside of the grip section. That's a sleeve that fits around the nib and the feed, and then that whole unit, the sleeve, the feed, and the nib, it all screws into the body of the pen, and you can see the threading there on the inside. I'm not going to take it out because it's full of ink, but you can see the threading there. So that helps to relieve some pressure that you have with a pen like this, and just gives me more confidence that a pen like this is going to last over the years. Now, you certainly don't need to buy a $500 pen or a $1,000 pen to get a screw-in nib unit. They are very common, but not generally used in pens in this price range. Usually I see them in pens maybe $50 and up, and it varies, but that's when I tend to start seeing them. But in general, I associate these screw-in nib units with fountain pen designs that feel nicer in quality, and they just feel like they're going to last longer than this kind of design. All right, so let's talk about the nibs themselves. The TWSBI nib is made by the company Jowo, which has great nibs that are widely used by many pen companies and small makers. I believe TWSBI nibs, though, are custom made and different from your average Jowo nib. So I've got a fine nib and a medium nib here. TWSBI nibs tend to be good. My fine nib is a little on the scratchy side, depending on the writing angle, but the medium on this Eco is pretty nice. It's very juicy and thick. These are steel nibs, and they are stiff. You're not really going to get any line variation out of them, but that's not what they're meant for. These are good nibs for everyday writing, taking notes, journaling, planning, etc. The nibs on the Omas pens are a big contributor to the high price. I'm only going to show you the Ogiva nib because this nib is a stacked nib. That is a completely different animal, and I'm going to save a whole video just for that, so stay tuned for that. But let's focus on this nib for now. This nib is made from 14 karat gold. If you're new to the concept of a fountain pen having a gold nib, it might seem like a pointless luxury, but there is a purpose to it beyond just being fancy. Gold nibs tend to be more flexible than steel nibs, which can make them feel softer and bouncier as you write. I can feel a huge difference when I'm using the Ogiva. It's not a flex nib. You can't really do calligraphy with it. At least I don't recommend doing that, but it just feels like you have a nice little suspension system in your pen as you write. And the extra fine nib on this pen is lovely. I tend to steer clear of extra fine nibs because I've had some bad experiences with them, but this nib is so much fun to write with. It's smooth, soft, and it's just a joy to use. I can tell that this nib has been masterfully polished. It's an extra fine, so it's not the smoothest nib ever, but it's just about the smoothest extra fine I've ever used. And it writes flawlessly from any angle, from very low all the way up to 90 degrees. And that's more than I can say for my TWSBI Ecos. They write great at lower angles, but the higher the angle, the rougher it gets until you feel like you're writing with a nail. And it's not unique to TWSBI. A lot of fountain pens are like that. So I'm just really impressed by the care that went into finishing this Omas nib. And when you look at these nibs up close, they both look fine. They both look good, but this one is just on a whole other level than the TWSBI. The Omas one, not only is it 14 karat gold, but it's also this dual-toned design that just looks really cool. It's really awesome. All right, now let's take a quick look at the feeds on these pens because that is another big difference here. Omas uses Ebonite feeds on their fountain pens, which is kind of a luxury pen thing. From what I've heard, in modern pens, there isn't really a huge performance difference between plastic and Ebonite feeds, but apparently back in the day, before a lot of innovation went into the modern plastic feed, Ebonite was far superior, and it's still highly regarded and used in a lot of luxury pens. The thought behind Ebonite is that on a microscopic scale at least, the material is more porous and textured than the smooth plastic, so the surface tension allows it to more effectively distribute the ink for a more consistent ink flow as you write. But most plastic feeds you use these days are great too. If you were to hand me a modern fountain pen that I wasn't familiar with and ask me to tell you if the feed was Ebonite or plastic just from writing with it, I would not be able to tell you. And I highly doubt that most other people could tell you either. But Ebonite is a very nice, durable material, and Ebonite feeds are more expensive to make, which can drive up the price of pens like the Paragon and the Ogiva. And the Ebonite feeds, like I said, are still highly regarded. So, is a $500 or a $1,000 fountain pen worth it? It really depends on the kind of experience you are looking for in a fountain pen. If you just want something that writes well, something like the TWSBI Eco is just fine. But if you want something that is a handmade work of art, especially one that uses precious materials, then maybe a luxury pen like the Ogiva or the Paragon are totally worth it to you. I think it also depends on what you plan to use a fountain pen for. If you're a college student or an urban sketcher, these Omas pens probably are not what you want to have bouncing around in your backpack. These are pens that you're intentionally going to sit down at a desk when you have a quiet moment to journal, to write letters, and to really just enjoy every element of the writing experience itself. I'm sure I'm going to get a lifetime of use out of my Ogiva, but it will probably not leave my house. And if it does, it will be rare. And when I'm done writing with it, it's probably going to go back in its nice cushy case as opposed to my larger book-style cases where I keep most of my fountain pen collection. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you team luxury or team entry level? If you want to take a look at a $2,000 pen, take a look at this video here. But if that doesn't interest you, YouTube seems to think that you might like this video. Thanks for watching.